In the beginning, God created man. Long before the emergence of culture, and certainly before the development of language, we had things. Early man began to understand that some things are similar to, if not copies of, other things. These similar things could be mentally collected and understood by giving them a name. This meta-identification of things into types allowed for rudimentary learning and understanding. Pictographic symbols of a thing can even begin to stand in for the thing that we wish to represent. It is commonly speculated that this is our very first example of what could now be considered magical thinking. Or, at least, this is the thing that many people who wish to defend magical thinking will point to in evidence. The story goes that prehistoric tribes would ritualistically draw pictures of buffalo or other animals that they hoped to find in their hunt. The suggestion is that by picturing a successful hunt, these earliest will workers helped manifest that success into reality. Pay no mind that these paintings, far older than any culture can speak to with confidence, could just as easily be the painting of a braggadocious but successful hunter. What came first? The painting or the hunt? A common problem in prophecy. Whatever the root cause of these pictures, the point remained that they are identifying animals, and they are communicating ideas about things that they understood. Those things had properties. The animal's meat was good to eat. After a time, they could come to understand the general capabilities, or even the range of capabilities an animal may have. If they develop techniques that increase their success at finding and hunting animals, they will also likely become more reliant on their success, and therefore the methods of obtaining that success. Knowledge about the thing begins to be collected and organized under the animal's type and its name. However, increasingly, things about the named animal will be true not about the animal itself, but rather meta to the animal entirely. The instincts of the animal and its behavior, whether one shows up or not. Despite your best efforts, these things seem to be particular to the type of animal, but not of any instance of it. From this, we see a rise of what is likely the earliest form of faith, animism. Animism believes that everything is imbued with a spirit. You and I both have a spirit and a soul, but so do every plant, animal, and even man-made items. These spirits manifest on meta levels as well. There is a soul to the deer, but that soul belongs to the greater soul that connects all deer. Over time, these meta-souls begin to be recognized and named, and it is widely seen that they control the lower-order systems they represent, rather than simply identifying them. This is how animism gives way to polytheism and the rise of gods. It wasn't just our understanding of spirits that was transforming within mankind. With this growing knowledge and understanding of the world's properties and the beings that inhabit it, we were able to harness the machines of life, resulting in the alchemical philosopher's stone that would transmute us from just another species of hominids to mankind, agriculture, and domestication. No longer were we wholly bound to what the universe brought to us. With these twin technologies, we fundamentally changed as a species. Not biologically, but something beyond or even above biological evolution. Increased control over our environments created more resources, which could support larger populations in cooperation rather than competition. Together, we began to impose order upon our environment. The need for stability drove us to develop and construct more sophisticated permanent residences. The increased need of a growing society necessitated communication and, more importantly, bookkeeping. From this, writing is formalized from pictographs to hieroglyphics, to letters and to words, and older systems are repurposed and adapted to new purposes and requirements. Within this environment, Our individual understandings of things and concepts increasingly become communal culture. The complexity of and increasing reliance on agriculture gives rise to a collective understanding and mythologizing of the idea of harvest and fertility with a godlike being, more often than not a feminine goddess. This is but one example, but any aspect of the human experience that was common enough to resonate with the majority of people often was identified and personified by a god. This allowed the formation of stories and legends that encode our understanding of those ideas. Likewise, as civilization and the idea of collective authority and identity emerge, they are nearly universally rooted in what would now be considered religious ideology. The societies identified themselves with a patron deity. Most of what we would today consider pantheons did not emerge whole cloth by central authority, but rather as a modern look back at the grand scope of deities within a culture and collecting them together in a way that those living through those years could never. However, as societies began to live cooperatively and later collectively, they had to acknowledge each other's beliefs and synthesize them. Thus, as civilization grew in complexity and multi-city civilizations emerged, polytheism further develops into pantheism, where a mostly enumerated collection of gods is collected by a culture as a full-fledged paradigm to discuss things like hunger, the beginning of culture, morality, justice, and the difference between the chaos of the uncontrolled world and the order that these civilizations sought to bring to it. Often in these cultures, individual gods within the pantheon would control specific regions, cities, or, as things further developed, services within the city. Egyptian cities were seen as ruled over by a god, whereas with the ancient Greeks, cults to various divine beings functioned more as government services in modern day. A god was understood to be an identity for a collective, as well as a collective identity. They also functioned as characters for our stories, and thus represent lessons, understanding, and culture. They had become our source of authority and identity. And, as it was sculpted by the very hands who sought to justify their own rule, they tended towards favoring stability, good behavior, and cultural cohesion. The gods of society taught that stability is good and chaos is scary, and the best way to be is to behave in a way that is pleasing to the gods, which most often point towards being good for society. This is not an accident, but rather a natural result of the emergence of society. It is worth noting that we know anthropologically that many early cultures actively participated in what we now call competitive historiography in their myths, and, in particular, origin story myths. Each subgroup would have its own version of the collective mythology that often highlights or elevates their own personal cultural deity. What this also means is that sometimes a subfaction takes over the collective understanding in one way or another, and imposes its version of history and knowledge of the pantheon upon the culture. We must always be mindful that all that we have left is what remains over time, and that for information to be preserved, not only must it not be destroyed, but it often must be actively maintained and recreated to stand the test of time. Many of these multi-city cooperative empires did not emerge through peace and trade, but were ultimately solidified by conquest. However, control across broad territories often require integrating and synthesizing the local traditions rather than forcefully rooting them out. Control is maintained by the understanding of a god of gods, one that rules over all the other gods, and who favors or is otherwise connected to the leader of the empire. It is not then altogether surprising that as empires grew in scale and sophistication, that pantheism can collapse into the idea of one ultimate god of gods, which is the perfect environment for the ultimate religious structure for centralized authority, monotheism. While it is still debated the precise reason for the conversion of Constantine to Christianity from the standard paganisms of Rome, Such a radical reversal of the position on Christianity by the state did help him further solidify a sprawling empire under his rule. As Bart Ehrman writes in his article, The Conversion of Constantine, quote, "Instead, what made Constantine's conversion revolutionary was that the imperial apparatus that before then had been officially opposed to Christianity and worked hard in some regions of the empire to extirpate it completely, suddenly came to support it, promoting Christianity instead of persecuting it." Additionally, Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, which was an opportunity to hash out the many differences between the early churches, resulting ultimately in the Nicene Creed, a declaration of faith designed as much to weed out opposing viewpoints such as Gnosticism as it was to reinforce a collective church identity. The principal question at stake was the nature of Jesus, his origin, and his relation to God the Father. And while it was not the origin of the concept of the Trinity, it is where it became the dogmatic understanding of Christianity. Nearly 8 decades later, when Theodosius was placed in charge of a crumbling empire, he attempted to unify the empire under the one church by issuing the Edict of Thessalonica, recognizing the orthodoxy as defined by the Council of Nicaea, and thus Christianity in its mostly modern form, as the state religion. One could say his plan ultimately failed, as the empire was divided between his two sons, sowing a divide that would continue in the unified church to this day. While previous traditions divided our understanding among a collection of deities, allowing those deities to represent those things within their culture, monotheism does not entertain those ideas. While the supreme god of a pantheon can still be the god of something like lightning or the sun, a monotheistic god must be the master of everything. All authority comes from this one god, and all other spirits must be lesser and either subservient to or in rebellion against the master god. In this, the one true God does become a token for a particular aspect of culture, that of authority itself. Things are right and wrong based on the exclusive authority of the one true God, as dictated by the official mouthpieces of that God. Unlike pantheistically driven cultures, monotheistic ones have a tendency to be far more aggressive in how they spread and how the culture identifies as separate and distinct from those outside of themselves. Unlike polytheistic traditions, monotheistic ones cannot synthesize other traditions in the same way. Foreign gods cannot be recognized for what they are to those cultures and must be reframed as demons or other lesser spirits. Other cultures are not seen as being like their own, but rather flawed, misguided people who must be shepherded to the flock at best and struck down at worst. Compromise and the integration of pantheons becomes no longer an option. However, as all of this was happening, society was also continuing to advance its technologies, and the evolution of religion into monotheism cannot be understood without the development of writing. What was born largely for utilitarian purposes, more sophisticated alphabets allowed for cultural record-keeping and defense against external corruption or destruction. It was what allowed the Israelite people to remain together and further solidify their identity while in exile. It was what allowed the Greeks and later the Romans the capability to spread their ideas and laws far and wide. And it was ultimately this technology that allowed monotheism to become dominant. Monotheism is most concerned with authority, and codifying tradition into a written work that can be copied and distributed and tested against is critical to that authority. Church leaders argued over which scriptures were canonical, while monastic traditions sprouted up, dedicating themselves to serving their God by copying the Holy Word repeatedly. This allowed the official faith to be exported like never before, but with it also came legalistic arguing and fracturing. Few people could actually read the book, but its authority was taught as brute fact. Those who could interpret it and wield the authority of the book became their leaders. But they were leaders of a collapsing system of the Roman Empire and beyond. As the authority of Rome collapsed, the churches and their traditions remained as a valuable source of community cohesion. However, weaknesses and disagreements in the doctrine of the church continued to drive further fracturings of the faith. To make matters worse, an offshoot of Christianity had been adopted by the Arabic prophet Muhammad, who effectively used it to construct an apparatus to conquer most of the Arabic world under his monotheistic Israelite derivative tradition of Islam. In both these cases, the older tradition of competing gods had been replaced by competing ideas about God. In the West and Near East, this was dominated by the collapse of the Roman and thus Christian authority, as one true church is increasingly questioned and rejected over time. Most notably, this is seen in the East-West Schism and, of course, ultimately, the Protestant Reformation. The Middle East, by contrast, was unified by its conversion to Islam, and within a few hundred years saw the rise of the Islamic Golden Age. Ultimately, it was the technology of writing that seemingly spurred on the next stage, with the printing press setting the stage for the Protestant Reformation by democratizing the availability of writing, along with coming out of the harrowing times of war and plague, including the Black Death. Western societies began looking at the old writings with renewed interest and with new perspectives. The difference between the actual messages of the Bible and the institutions that carried its authority could more readily be identified and called out. While it is true that the scientific method existed before the printing press, it is absolutely the case that the reach and effectiveness of the scientific method rely on our ability to record and communicate. Before the printing press, the act of writing and copying was laborious, and the results were often fragile. This meant those who had power, and the societies that developed traditions of writing, such as the monastic Christians, were the main source of collective authority. So while it is unfair to say that Christianity, or any such religion, conflicts with science, they are related in that they are implemented as a method of authority, and thus their power becomes weaker and threatened by the very same forces that make science a dominant practice for understanding. The biggest problem going forward is that religion makes certain claims about the nature of things. Much of the time, this is fine, as our understanding of the divine stems from our understanding of the universe. We understood that we didn't know how things work, and for many throughout history, the attempt to better understand the way that the universe works is the very way to know God. However, as religion became monotheistic and thus ultimately about authority, revelations about the world that seem to contradict the claims of the religion are no longer used to update the faith. How could they? The faith is already written down. The words have been copied time and time again. If they are wrong, then what does that mean for the authority that these words provide? Discovery becomes heresy unless it can be assimilated by the church and tradition. With reading and writing becoming more popular, society began developing an identity outside of a religious perspective. Much as Christianity survived the collapse of the Roman Empire by becoming a stateless religion, so too does society begin to assert its independence from the authority of religion. In this new world, the church no longer functions as the unifier of society, but increasingly becomes the enforcer of an established understanding of the universe, one that increasingly rejects modern understanding in favor of textual authority. The centuries of monotheistic rule had completely rewritten how people conceived of religion and the divine. While the various monotheistic traditions are often in conflict with one another, they are unified in presenting to the Western world a very simple choice: believe the faith as established, or be a heretic. This becomes a problem in two ways. Firstly, it purges from among the ranks of the faithful those who wish to have a more logical framework, leaving behind only those who are willing to reject contrary information in favor of blind faith. And possibly just as dangerously, it allows a more secular materialist worldview to rise and undermine the very society-building functions the religions have always provided us. It is into this environment that the modern age is born. Increasingly complex and powerful methods of communication, travel, and trade must confront and be confronted by a system of authority struggling to keep its hold on culture. The most effective church leadership is no longer who can be the best heart of the community, but who can best maintain the tradition and protect their membership from corruptive thinking. This is not to say that religion is evil, quite the opposite. As we have seen here at every step of the way, religion has brought us together, given us a collective identity and strength, and spurred us on to discover more. The traditions themselves teach of virtue and piety. To be a good Christian is to be a good person within society. Turn the other cheek, give to the poor, and accept that you are not the ultimate authority in your life. However, as time goes on, many of these virtues are adopted as humanist principles, not requiring a god or church to grant importance. This leaves the church in an interestingly difficult position of having to defend the more problematic pieces of its doctrine, while increasingly losing its monopoly on the society's positive ideals. But now we face a more complicated problem. Religion has always been used by authority to establish itself and impose its will in shaping its people. However, as a secular alternative has emerged, the forces of power has shifted towards systems and power devoid of higher authority. No longer bound to even pretend piety, our culture has rapidly pivoted away from any sense of virtue and morality and towards wealth and fame as being commendable in their own right. Religion, no longer the central authority in the culture, must now sustain itself by using righteousness as a cudgel and piety as a rubric to condemn others. The religious become ripe for exploitation, a self-selected group of people who will reject external facts in favor of their known authorities. In America, we see the capitalistic manipulation of Christianity into the birth of the modern evangelical movement and, at its worst, the prosperity gospel, a justification of increasing wealth inequality by inflating financial success with godly favor and poverty as sin. This creates a flavor of Christianity that can be callous to those they do not favor and reinforces the in-group, out-group dichotomy that is popular in modern conservatism. All while secular forces offer up a solution that often leads to its own forms of dehumanization. It isn't really surprising that all of this is happening right now. As with every step of this journey, the increasing sophistication of society, technology, and religion goes hand in hand. We live in a time of unprecedented personal power. Never before have we had as individuals the ability to get our voice out there. The fact that I can sit in my home comfortably and type out this writing, record this video, edit it, upload it for you to watch, which could be seen by hundreds or even millions of people in different times and places, is incredible. This is a very dangerous time for our systems of power. And you can see that in how they struggle to maintain control. But we do need systems of authority and power, just as systems of authority and power need us. What we are seeing is a transition on a civilizational level, the likes of which we probably have not seen since the birth of agriculture and the dawn of civilization itself. So where do we go from here? We must keep sight of what binds us and what divides us. We must realize that we are in constant struggle for control by those systems that work to shape us to be more docile, controllable, and passive. While at the same time, we must remember that with or without godly authority, ultimately we are judged and valued by who we are to one another. Our history is shaped by those who want us to believe that they are great. But we are no longer shackled by the systems of information control that we once were. Our salvation ultimately doesn't come from any one church or authority, but rather from our ability to communicate, share ideas, and grow together. The early scientists, the ones who shaped our understanding of the universe, did not see their search as conflicting with their spirituality. Sir Isaac Newton, father of physics and calculus, was a practicing alchemist and a deeply religious, if unorthodox, Christian. Spirituality, virtue, and the sense of higher purpose do not need to be in contention with modern understanding. And anyone trying to convince you otherwise is likely drawing you into yet another trap of control. Reject hypocrisy. Live gloriously.